half of the world's women and children are living in countries experiencing active conflict. Can you imagine? More than half of the world's women and children are living in countries experiencing active conflict of some nature. The international community cannot continue to ignore their plight. The researchers recently estimated that armed conflicts affect at least 630 million women and children globally. Can you imagine? 630 million women and children globally. So when you think about that kind of a broad view of the world, the first thing I want to say is that how blessed are we from where we sit today at the comfort of our own homes, with our families, with our children, and enjoying 3 meals a day. And we have a roof above us protecting us. We have a God, we have a church we can go to, we have friends and families we can visit. And I would tell you, walk you through the real impact of these wars on the 630 million women and children globally. Over the last 20 years, warfare has resulted, you won't believe this, in the death of more than 10 million children under 5 years of age. Can you imagine? In the last 20 years alone, more than 10 million children under the age of 5 died, including between 6.7 and 7.5 million infants. They didn't even get a chance to see or enjoy a portion of the world, not of their fault, because of what we face today. It is not just death from a war, but the indirect adverse impact of war cannot be overlooked. The new estimates you just heard provide compelling evidence of the enormous indirect toll of modern warfare caused by easily preventable infectious diseases as a result of these wars, malnutrition, sexual violence, and poor mental health, as well as the destruction of basic services such as water and medical facilities. You are seeing that right now in Ukraine, hospitals are being grounded into dust. And those facilities most probably may not come back for years because of the economic impact in that economy. There are about 54 state-based armed conflicts that had lasted 20 years or more, occurring in about 35 countries right now. There is some means of an armed conflict that are ongoing in about 35 countries right now. The nature of the armed conflict throughout the world is intensely dynamic. Living near the war, 1 in 10 women are nearly 1 in 6 children globally. Can you imagine that stat? 1 in 10 women nearly 1 in 6 children globally were living within 50 kilometers of an armed conflict, or it had forcibly displaced them. For the people living in these areas with an active combat, the danger goes beyond just simply the direct violence. Evidence suggests that the risk of dying from a non-violent causes increases substantially. Just like being in Philadelphia, Center City, you just happen to be walking by South Street. There was somebody pulled up a gun and shooting somebody, and you just happen to be at the wrong location at the wrong time, can get you killed. It happens every day in Washington, D.C. Exactly that. Even though you may not be directly involved in a war, just by being in the surrounding neighborhoods, in the surrounding countries, also pose a risk of you dying from the war. Women of childbearing age living near intense fighting are 3 times more likely to die than women living in peaceful settings. Can you imagine? Those living in those neighborhoods or in a war zone, and they have a chance of dying 3 times more than you and me. Why? Because they are being indirectly involved in a conflict. And also, their infants, as you heard previously, are also more than 25% more likely to die at an young age. Wars and conflicts destroy lives, livelihoods, and economy, families, and much more, but women are disproportionately affected by them. So I'm really happy this morning I am talking to you, the women of our church, to understand and be blessed to be where we are while we are trying to understand and comprehend the inequalities and the suffering and the inequities magnified during the last decades after a conflict. Women continue to bear the brunt of this problem. Let us take a closer look. I'm going to talk about 5 points. The first one is gender-based violence. Gender-based violence. In 1994, Rwanda, many of you know Rwanda, was ravaged by genocide. Nearly 1 million people are estimated to have been killed in just listen to this stat. 1 million people were estimated to have killed in just over 100 days. Can you imagine? In just in 3 months, 1 million people estimated to have been killed in Rwanda. I don't know if it is a blessing or not, but I was blessed to visit Rwanda after the genocide, about 10 years after the genocide. So I seen the ravage that left behind from that genocide 10 years later, how the country is even today suffering from the impact of that genocide. The Rwandan genocide is infamous. However, for its effect on women due to the genocide rape, that is the first thing that you need to understand. The genocide rape, in the same period of 100 days, about 250,000 to 500,000 women were estimated to have been raped in Rwanda. I'm talking about one country, in Rwanda alone, just during that 100 days of genocide, about 500,000 women being raped. Rape was systematically and was used as a weapon by the bad guys of the massacres. This can be estimated from the number and the nature of the victims, as well as from the forms of rape. Many of men, as you see in Ukraine, went to fight in the armed forces and militias in the genocide, leaving a significant of those men dead. They never come back home. Women who were not as educated or experienced as their male counterparts were left to fend for themselves and their families. The Rwandan genocide is only one example of rape being used as a weapon. Even, I don't mind saying this, even in the old days in Kerala or in India, the policemen used to use rape as a weapon against our communities, our families in lower income locations. You know, you see in movies, right? That being used. Unfortunately, the sexual violence and gender-based violence are mainstays in most conflicts around the world, even today. Number 2, public health. Armed conflicts, as you see in Ukraine, often disproportionately has negative health effects on women and girls. Women and girls. There is an increased risk of injury, death, and physical and mental illness at a time when public health services are either destroyed or in a much reduced stage. Take Ukraine, for example. Most of the women and children now are leaving the country as refugees into another neighboring country. Their own internal hospitals are being erased to ground. You just heard a couple of days ago a bombing of a hospital. And what are the chances of these refugees, the women and children, getting medical attention as a refugee in another nation? Very small, very small. Women often bear the brunt of the lack of these services as the available resources are diverted to men at war, or the preference is definitely given to their own citizens of a nation they are refuging into. So therefore, the responsibility of providing for the family during a war and after the war falls in the hands of a woman. And they often produce or gather whatever they can, which is when they are vulnerable to injury and death. They don't really care about themselves at that time. They simply want to take care of their families. You see them back in Kerala and in India, right? Woman goes to become a servant. Even some of them were born in a wonderful family, but ended up becoming a servant, washing pots and pans and cooking. And you see them even in movies that what happens? They are being attacked, they are being raped, and they are being exposed and exploited during that time. And because of this, women's life expectancy also disproportionately reduces as compared to men, because of the hardship they are taking, they die much sooner than men. So therefore, you see here the indirect effect of economic change, displacement, and sexual violence. Number 3, displacement and trafficking. I've been unfortunately recognized as an expert in Washington on trafficking, human trafficking. Children and women make up an estimated 80% of displaced populations according to UNICEF report. Look at Ukraine. All the women and children are being fled as refugees into the neighboring nation. They may never reunite themselves with their families. Some of the husbands will never come back because they died. And this woman will be displaced for years and years, and many may not make it out of this war. Why? They become the underserved. They become the unequal. They become the suffering and the struggling, and they become the victims of these wars and die sooner than they should, like us. Women and children are allowed to leave, as you saw, into neighboring countries as refugees. Great, wonderful. They have been taken in. But men have to stay back, as in Ukraine, to fight. They cannot leave. Some men never, as I said, be reunited. I can tell you from my own story in Iraq. I had a team of 15 people. You heard this story from me many times. 13 of my team died in an attack. Only two of us survived. Myself, I came back home to my wife and children, and the driver also came back to his family. But the 13 never came back to their family. So those families now are displaced, and those wives are left to take care of their own children and worry and focus on their well-being rather than theirs. So here, those women are struggling and suffering today to bring food at the table. And girls and women, as I said, are among the most vulnerable in refugee camps. They don't have adequate facilities for sanitation, public bathrooms. They get no education. They get no health care. So you can imagine These camps with the limited resources, they have no food. Some of them don't have water. They don't have the necessities of a daily life in those centers. So what happens? There are men now coming around to exploit them. That is where the trafficking of women and girls become very common. And they've been documented where possibly. I still remember a story from Palestine. I was there, I witnessed with my own eyes. I was at a checkpoint in Palestine. From a checkpoint from Palestine into Israel, there was an ambulance with a woman and the entire family. The woman was pregnant, just ready to give birth. Nobody could help. They had to stay in line to pass that checkpoint for about 4 hours before they would let them into Israel to go to a hospital. Guess what? While they were waiting in the ambulance, the mother gave birth to a child, beautiful child, Palestinian child. Unfortunately, because of the complexity, that mother died in that ambulance at the checkpoint. And they had to wait there 4+ hours without no priority to pass through. So there are a lot of these kinds of sad stories happens. Same thing in Iraq. I can tell you stories after stories of poor families who struggled and suffered from the impact of these wars. Therefore, these women and children are exploited day by day, and some of them never see the light of a future. They don't get the education they deserve. They don't get to go to medical school as our children would. They would not get a home as we do have to survive in our society. And these are the major impact. On top of that, number 4 is economic impact. I already mentioned this earlier. The women become the breadwinners of the home, and they end up not getting a good job because they are refugees, or they cannot go back into their own country, or when they go back into their own countries, the economy is so bad. Now they become servants and doing small jobs here and there. Some end up becoming prostitutes, not of their choice, but because they need to raise their family. And these are the economic impact. They get low skilled jobs because they never got the training they should have. Many become self-employed, like serving some, cleaning, dusting, whatever they do, just to make the end meet, at least one meal a day. So when you look at all these things, we can see how blessed you and I are today, where we are in Ben Salem or somewhere in Philadelphia or somewhere in this wonderful nation. And we have economic opportunities that these poor folks will never experience. You see that even in good times, Ukraine's condition you saw, not that great, very poor. So the female-led households end up very vulnerable and face a high risk of poverty as compared to male-led households. And this vulnerability crosses generation, not just one generation. It comes into their children, the girls, and then it passes on. So these can last for generations, 30, 40, 50 years, like in Iraq, Afghanistan, or in Ukraine, those kind of like Rwanda. Rwanda is still suffering after how many years? After 30 years. So what I'm saying is that the conflict and its impact on women and girls and children will last for generations to come. That is where the political leaders need to become a little more sensitive about what the heck they are doing to these families, especially women and children. The last thing I want to say is, it's all negative. At the same time, there is some positivity. The positivity is that in some of these nations where it was a men-led society, now there becomes a chance for women to become political leaders. It is an impact. It's a reaction to the war. In many locations where women and children are exploited, there's a good chance that there may be some leaders of women in nature, they will come out and become part of the democratic process because of the suffering they took. They now can exploit the experience to gain votes. A third of the countries that have 30% or more women in parliament experience a recent conflict. So typically in a parliament setting, after a war, few years after the war, you see an increased membership in the political party by women. Why? Now they want to become the advocates for the next generation. And they tend to help in those situations to fight for their children, especially for the girls out there. To conclude, the implications of the war, as you heard from me, from the stats I called out, the conflict can be extremely severe to the extent life-threatening for women. It impacts your life for a lifetime, generations after generation. In the middle of this Lent, what we, the community, can do is twofold. One is to pray for them on our knees, so God will find them peace and reunite them as families with their husbands back in Ukraine, especially, and in other 50 locations across the globe. The second thing is whatever we can do. There's a misunderstanding about Lent. It is not about fasting from food. It is not simply fasting from meat or eggs or milk or fish. It is about the good deeds you can do. If you can set aside the money you save from this fasting from food, or if you can set aside really the 10% of your income to help those, especially in Ukraine. It's an Orthodox community, it's an Orthodox country. If you can set aside as a community, the Bensalem community, and send some money, forget about the clothes. I'm talking about real money because, again, they need healthcare support, they need medicine, they need clothes, they need to buy them, and they need homes to stay. They don't have any of these things. Can you imagine? Just compare for a second. You sitting in the comfort of your home, having just had breakfast, most probably. You had a nice, you can smell the coffee, right? And you had a beautiful breakfast, most probably appam or something, or you had some toast, something, right? And your family is next to you in another room or in the same room. Think about for a family who is now trying to get out of Ukraine. Compare that person, that woman, and their children. And it is now 30 plus degrees colder than Philadelphia and Washington. Think about them trying to walk across the border. Still, the shells are coming, the rockets are coming, and they don't know they will make it across the border as a refugee into another country. They just said goodbye to their husband. Now they are walking or taking a bus or trying to get on a bus. They have to stand at a border for days to get a stamp on their passport to go to the next country. Once they get there, what's going to become of them? No medical support. They don't even know where they're going to stay, in a tent, possibly for years sometimes, or months or weeks. Have no job, no money, no food, no medical support. Now they become the victim of a war for generations to come. Think about the children, the girls, without no proper sanitation, without having to go into a common bathroom. Now they may become the victims of a human trafficker. And the mother may never seen that girl ever again because somebody now sold that woman, that girl, to another country. Gone, finished. So think about these things. Compare us, how blessed we are to those who are now suffering from various conflicts across 50 plus nations out there. 630 million women across the globe is suffering from the adverse impact of a conflict of some nature. open your hearts, set aside to the extent possible. As Sgmoc will definitely vouch for me, all the wealth we build in this temporal world has no meaning. The wealth we need to build is in the eternal kingdom for being a good Christian, a Christ-like person through our deeds and our words in this world. That is the legacy you want to leave behind for your children and generations to come. My mom was a good person. She set aside whatever she can, not for me, for somebody who is struggling and suffering out there without food and without shelter, without proper hospital and healthcare system. And I want to stop right there. May God bless. And I want to thank Sgmoc for giving me this opportunity. I'm going to now let Ajita talk to you for about 5 minutes and let you know the real life experience she went through when I was, as Sgmoc said, when I was trying to survive in Afghanistan and Iraq for many, many months. So I'm going to turn this over to Ajita for a few minutes. And thank you for giving me this opportunity.
Thank you, Sgmoc. Thank you, my friends, for giving me this opportunity to talk. I'm not a good speaker like Sgmoc or Alexander Kurian. While Achan was giving us a talk, I was just trying to recollect how the war personally impacted me. My husband, Alexander Kurian, was in Iraq for 15 months. And in Afghanistan for 18 months. It was the toughest time in my life. I was very much used to his overseas travels, but going to our zone for such a long time was really terrifying. There were times I was not able to contact him for many days, leaving my mind in total darkness and telling the kids that their Appa will be home soon with wonderful gifts. I had to act as a perfect strong mom for the children. At that time, everything in my life seemed to be doomed and hopeless. And then I found my solace in prayer. In order to move forward after putting the kids to bed, every night I prayed with a completely broken heart to give me the strength and courage to walk confidently to face each day. This was the most toughest days in my life. Through prayer, though prayer helped me a lot, I was constantly worrying about his safety. At times, my faith was like a reed shaken by wind. I was so scared to turn the news channels, and it was very difficult to sleep at night, even daytime. But I had to run a home. I had 3 little children to manage, plus Eli was getting sick more often. And there were times I had to take him to the hospital after midnight with the other 2 little kids sleeping in the car. These are my own struggles. Even if I was sick, even though I was sick, I was not able to get a good sleep or laying down. Due to constant stress and sleepless nights, I got very bad headaches, neck pain, dizziness, and later diagnosed with hypertension. Yet I managed everything myself, only by the grace of God. I talked to my dad every day, as he had full confidence in me, and I needed that assurance at that time. He always advised me to cling to Genesis 30:26, which says, I will never let you go unless you bless me. Since that day, I've been holding that close to my heart till the end of my life. Being the only daughter of my parents, they were so concerned about me, my kids, and Achin's safety. I had to console them and calm them down as well by pretending that everything is okay here. Also, I had to manage all the finances, making all the payments on time and manage money wisely. Fortunately, I didn't have to go to work. Even with all the stress, I still had to move on with maintaining my calmness and stay focused. In my case, my husband returned home very safe. We were financially fine too. My kids were safe home, and I was homeschooling my girls. Many women who were experiencing what doesn't have that luxury. They need to work for a living. There is no one to look after their kids. Most of the children's life is not safe either. I can only imagine what these women are going through every day until their husbands are reunited, if they ever are going to be reunited. I tasted a fraction of their pain myself. I feel and understand the struggles and the loss of these many women. I don't know how I can help them, but we all can do something which is very favorable to them. Thank you for this opportunity.
Thank you.